Hello and welcome to another episode of Autogefuhl, today with me AJ and Jonas. This weekend you join us in the beautiful Black Forest of southern Germany and we have with us the all-new Opel or Vauxhall Grandland X Hybrid 4. As you can guess, this is the first plug-in hybrid that Opel has ever released. So let's see what this SUV is capable of. The Grandland X is 1.85 meters wide and 4.47 meters long, but in this hybrid variant it weighs about 1.8 tons. Up front, I think the first thing you'll notice is this black hood, which is very cool, very Opel. It is an option if you would like to have it, and I think, as we'll see later on, coupled with the roof and the mirrors, this black top looks pretty interesting. Up front, there's nothing really to distinguish this as the hybrid version of the Grandland X, but because this is only available in the top two trims, the Innovation or the Ultimate, you do get things, a lot of features as standard. For example, these LED daytime running lights are standard, and if you pick the Ultimate trim, you also get full LED lights as standard. Since the Grandland X Hybrid 4 comes in the top variants, you get 19-inch wheels, and in this case they are dual tone, and I think coupled with this whole black scheme for the top of the hood, the roof, the wing mirrors, and this black cladding that runs along the wheel arches as well as in the bottom of the side, there's a lot of black and contrasting colors with this red. I think it looks pretty good. There's not too much design lines except for one on the top over here and another kink down here to kind of make this central part of the doors kind of protrude a little bit. And I think when the sun is out, not like right now, it has a nice play of light and shadow because especially of this this curve down here and here, it kind of accentuates this area of the car and breaks up, the side and makes it a little bit more interesting to look at. I think here at the back of the SUV, we do see a little bit more sharp lines than we did on the side or in the front. For example, these tail lamps have a nice corner right here, and I like this design of the LEDs as well. The rear windshield is also fairly large. It's not at a very steep angle. This doesn't have that kind of coupe-esque body line, which means of course there's better space on the inside, and when you're driving there's a better view out back. All right, let's take a look under the hood. Speaking of which, it's not pneumatically assisted. You have to do it the old-fashioned way. So plug-in hybrid, interesting. What do we have? Well, this is the 1.6 liter turbocharged 4-cylinder petrol engine, which makes 200 horsepower. And then there are two electric motors. There's one coupled with the 8-speed automatic transmission on the front axle. So this engine and that motor, and coupled with that 8-speed auto, drive the front wheels. In the back, there is an integrated inverter differential and another second electric motor driving the rear axle. The combined output of the system is 300 horsepower and 520 newton meters of torque, which is a pretty good power output if you ask me. The car weighs 1.8 tons, but it still has a pretty good power to weight ratio for cars of this type, or rather SUVs of this type. Now, speaking of charging, there's different ways you can have that accomplished. There is a onboard 3.3 kilowatt charger, which charges the 13.2 kilowatt hour lithium-ion battery, which is installed under the rear seats. You can also optionally get a 6.6 kilowatt version of the onboard charger. If you plug it into a 7.4 kilowatt wall box, you can get 0 to 100% charge in about 2 hours. So it's pretty useful because you get about 59 kilometers of range on electric power only, and with a 2-hour charging time, you could effectively drive this car as an electric car on your daily commute to office. And of course, when you're going on long drives, that hybrid technology ensures you get really good mileage, nevertheless, on the highway. Here's the key fob for the Grandland X. I don't think it's anything very different, but you get keyless entry, so you just come up to the car and touch the door handle and it unlocks and you can open the door. The door opens really wide, again because of the SUV body style. The door itself is fairly tall, so it makes getting inside very easy. The materials up here are pretty good, but it's quite monotone here. There is a little bit of this dark gray inlay down here. Now in the Innovation trim, you still have the option of getting fabric and faux leather seats, so it's always a good way to save money and be a little bit kinder to animals. But in the Ultimate trim, you only get full leather seat options. Nevertheless, as you can see, the seat has a lot of adjustment, a lot of automatic adjustment as well with memory function, and they are fairly comfortable. And we'll take a look at that once we get inside and we start driving. Again, climbing in is fairly easy thanks to this higher ride height. There's plenty of space, there's a lot of headroom. I'm about 5'8" or 1.7 meters, and the seat is not even set to the lowest position, so there's a lot of nice space. It's very airy, also with the lighter color for the headliner. So the instrument cluster, I think, is fairly conventional. You have two analog dials, the speedometer on the right-hand side and a tach on the left. But as you can see, because this is a hybrid, you have a range below zero to show you how much of energy you're recuperating with the regenerative brakes. On the top, you have two fuel gauges, or, at least one fuel gauge and one battery gauge. Of course, it's really cold today, so the battery's pretty flat already since we've been driving for some time. But the TFT display down here shows a lot of useful information. Now, there is a range with pure electric mode that's also displayed. And the truth is, even though on paper you get 59 kilometers of pure electric range, it really depends on your driving scenario and how you, if you're driving in the mountains or in the city. And what the car also does is it calculates your last trip and how you drove and how much electricity was used in the to run the car, and will give you a more realistic range for just pure electric driving. The touchscreen itself is fairly responsible. It's got a nice matte finish, so it doesn't leave fingerprints as much. And of course you have DAB, you have a full navigation, you can get live traffic. You also have like the connected service, which will give you live traffic updates, weather updates. If you need an emergency assistance, there's a button on the top, an SOS button, which you can just click and then it will call the emergency services, things like that. Of course, Bluetooth connectivity for your phone. And you can mirror your phone with Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. And of course, a lot of details for setting up the different various things in your car settings itself. But what's interesting is this little lightning bolt button. This is, of course, specific for this plug-in hybrid version. So if you click on this, there's a nice infographic which shows you if you're running it from just the petrol engine, the electric motor in the front, how the status of the battery is, and if you're running it on the electric motor in the back. And it's just a nice infographic which kind of gives you a good idea of what's being used at any given point in time. A lot of statistics. If you're really into this kind of stuff, there's so much you can do. I mean, that's the really big, there's the talking point about electric or hybrid cars is it's so much of different statistics and how you drive, the temperature. There's so many variables. So you can play around with this and try to, improve the range overall. And then you can program charging start times and so on. But what I wanted to tell you guys about is this eSave. Now, let's say you're driving into, a city center where you live or where you go to work every day, and it's in a no emission zone, or you want to, drive in very quietly, and you want to make sure that you have enough battery left to drive this last 10, 20 kilometers in pure electric mode only. Then you can put this eSave on, and it will ensure, no matter how much you're driving before, will always save enough battery to do 10 or 20 kilometers, the last home stretch in pure electric mode only. All right, let's take a look in the back. The door opens fairly wide. There is also a nice sunshade here for your passengers if they want to, take a nap or something. The materials up here are fairly hard, but you do get some more plush materials down here, especially where you keep your arm and your elbow, so that's nice. a cubby hole as well to keep some water bottles. The overall space is fairly rectangular, so it's easy to put in child seats. The isofix points are also very easy to locate with those badges. You don't have to fumble with any covers or trying to squeeze it between the seat. It's very easy to get inside. I have a handle here, so it's very easy to jump inside. This higher ride height also means that, I don't have to stoop down too low to get in. This seat is set to my driving position. I'm 5'8" or 1.7 meters. So I have plenty of knee room. Since the seat is also a little bit higher, and being an SUV, you would probably tend to drive with a slightly higher seating position anyway. So there's just a little bit of room for me to slide my feet under, but to be honest, not so much. There's a little bit of obstruction further up ahead, but I think overall it's fairly comfortable. Let's take a look in the trunk. There is a sensor down there, so you can just kick. Suppose you're carrying heavy items, but it's also cool because you can also use the same kick to let the hatch close down. There's of course a button as well if you want to do it the more manual way by pressing it once. There we go. So as you can imagine, because we have the electric motor, the battery, the differential, and the inverter, you do lose a little bit of space here in the trunk. In fact, you lose about 120 liters. So now this area stands at 390 liters of boot space, but if you put the seats down, it goes up to about 1,500 liters, which is still pretty good. All right, let's start off our drive here on the highway. We're just heading out of the airport, going up towards the Black Forest. Really looking forward to some great roads and great landscape. But let's analyze how the Grandland X Hybrid 4 performs out on the open road. To make my life easier when driving on the highway, this car comes with quite a lot of assistance systems. So let's start with that. As you can imagine, this also has the adaptive cruise control system. So I can just select this with the button on the steering wheel and set a speed. Right now it's saying activation denied, conditions unsuitable. So let's try that again. And there we go. So I set my speed now. The speed limit is 130. So I'm going to set it at a very comfortable 125. I can also choose the distance I want the car to be maintaining with the traffic in front of me with this other button, and I can have it, distant, normal, or close. So I'm going to keep it normal. Second thing I want to set is change the driving mode into hybrid. Now this is a very smart system, so it's going to try to analyze what is the best mode of propulsion, given that there's an electric motor on the front axle, an electric motor in the rear axle, as well as the 1.6 liter turbo 4 petrol engine. It's going to pick what is the best depending on the speed, the momentum, the gradient, the throttle position. Well, in this case, the throttle position that's automatically being maintained, and pick what is the most efficient way to drive the car. There's also lane keeping assist. So if I were to stray off the lane like this, the car will automatically steer me in place and giving me a little flashing warning sign to know that, hey, okay, you're kind of steering and veering off the lane. So we ditched the traffic a little bit and found an open stretch of road. So let's put it through its paces a little bit. So now in the sport mode, like I was saying, the steering is a little bit heavier, but on the whole, the feedback is not that great. However, the steering is fairly direct. So that means that there's very little slack at dead center. So even a small, modulation of the steering wheel does affect the steering of the car. So it is a very direct steering, and the steering rack itself also is not really that slow. It's not a fast rack, but as you can see here, to take these gentle curves, I don't need to put so much of steering lock. So that makes it a little bit more fun to drive. It means I can retain this position on the steering wheel and I don't have to shuffle my hands too much. but the engine does not become any louder in the sport mode. Yes, if I put my foot down and shift down, I can hear it a little bit more, but it's not necessarily a very sporty sounding engine. It's very smooth, being a 4-cylinder as well, that if it was a 3-cylinder, you get that burble, which inherently, even if it's not trying to be sporty, that burbling sound does evoke a little bit more sensation of speed. But because it's a very smooth 4-cylinder, you don't really get that. You can take over the control of the gearbox with your paddle shifters, and you might want to do that from time to time, because the 8-speed auto on its own doesn't necessarily react all that quickly. So you can come into a corner like this and put your foot down. There's a little bit of understeer, and that rear axle, even though it's electrified, we were talking about earlier, doesn't provide too much of a rotational inertia. Even though there's a drive with more faster torque delivery in the rear axle, you would expect that it kind of overtakes the front and you get that rotation. That really isn't the case here. So it's more about traction and comfort. The suspension, and like I mentioned, there's no separate adaptive mode. There is just the one standard coilover ratio in the suspension. So it does tend to lean a little bit more around corners. So body control is also not that great. It does weigh 1.8 tons, so it's kind of inevitable. But what's interesting and what's perhaps better for the handling is the fact that, because of that rear axle unit with the motor and the batteries being placed below the rear seat, there's a little bit more weight on the rear axle as well. So it's not that front heavy. Now, I wouldn't really say the weight distribution is 50-50 or something like that, because when we talk about 50-50 weight distribution, it's not just about having weight plonked on the front axle and weight plonked on the rear axle. It's actually a little bit more about centralizing that mass as well. Really high-end sports cars and GTs like, the Aston Martins pay a lot of attention to that, where you have mass centralization, putting it lower to get a lower center of gravity, and distributing that across the two axles. That's where you get a proper weight distribution. So here, I can definitely feel that weight going around corners. The engine sounds loud, not necessarily sporty, and doesn't also really translate to, speed. So, sporty handling is not, I would say, its forte. But the steering is definitely better than the Peugeot 3008. So I reset the trip meter not too long ago to try to get a better idea of the fuel efficiency. And for driving over just about 40 kilometers, we got 4.6 liters for 100 kilometers. And a longer trip from earlier in the day, with 186 kilometers, we were getting 5.9 liters for 100 kilometers. So I think 4.6 is a pretty respectable number. And keep in mind that we were driving pretty much the entire time in the Black Forest, so with mountainous roads and narrow roads and with a lot of braking and accelerating. So you can expect numbers a little bit better than this. Let's summarize today's episode of the Opel Grandland X Hybrid 4. Prices start at 51,000 euros for the Innovation trim and 54,000 euros for the Ultimate trim. That seems a bit expensive. In fact, it's about 13,000 euros more expensive than the equivalent petrol. But keep in mind, you will get tax deductions because it's a plug-in hybrid vehicle. So, what did I like and what did I not like about this SUV? For starters, I think it's very comfortable. The suspension is very plush, it's very quiet. Again, thanks to that electric motor. There's a lot of space on the inside, and 300 PS or metric horsepower and 520 newton meters of torque with the combined system is really great for inline, straight acceleration and overtaking on the highway. What I didn't like so much perhaps is the fact that it's not very sporty in terms of its handling capabilities. But then again, every SUV doesn't need to be sporty, and in fact the Grandland X isn't trying to be. But on the other hand as well, even though this does come with a lot of great technology, it's not a brand new platform, and some key features like matrix LED lights are just missing altogether. But overall, it's definitely a great package. The mileage, since we drove in the Black Forest, we didn't get a great number, But if you charge it up every night and try to drive in the electric mode as much as possible, just using the petrol engines on the highway, then you can get really good numbers, around 2 or 3 liters for 100 kilometers. So that's my verdict. Let me know what you guys think. Put it down in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.